Okay, let's do LeetCode 1869, longer contiguous segments of ones and zeros in JavaScript. What we're doing here is we're looking through this input string and we're seeing, are the ones in a row longer than the zeros that are all in a row? So then we want to return true or false from that. So this one, there's more zeros than one, so we're going to return false for that. And this one, we're going to return true because there's 2 ones in a row and there's only 1 0 in a row. Okay, let's code this out. So we're going to need a couple of storage variables here. To keep track of things. And we want to set them just to be 0 to start with. And then we're going to use a for loop to loop through this string, and we're going to use a couple of if checks inside the for loop to check to see if we're a 1 or a 0, and we'll add logic from there. So let's code out this for loop. And one thing I just noticed, I was typing out window n. We actually aren't really using a sliding window here, so we don't need to use that. We can just use I. There we go. Okay, so if I equals 1, we're going to do some logic. Else if I equals 0, we're going to do some other logic. So what we want to do in here, let's start out by doing some console logs in here so I can show you. Let's do this right here. We'll do it like this. We'll go S, I, okay, then we want to grab this guy, throw that in there so we can take a look and see at how this is going to operate here. So let's run this. It's going to give us a fail because we're not actually returning or doing anything. We're just doing some logs here. So you can see 1, 1, 0, 1. Okay, that's working great. What we want to do when we find an I is we want to add to the count, right? So we're going to go count plus equals 1, and that's count 1. And then down here, we want to do count 0 plus equals 1. So we're going to increment the counts every time we go through. So what we need to do is we need to remember, this is like the trick of this. When we're going through this and we're adding these counts, we need to check the max of the count and the max length that we're storing here. We're going to add up a count, and when we run out of consecutive numbers, we're going to push that count, or I should say store that count in the max length, whatever that max length is. Then what we're going to do is we're going to reset the count to 0. But we don't want to do that in the wrong spot in here. So when we run into a situation where we'll say, in this case, we have 1101. Let's change this, 1101. So to run through this for loop, we run into a situation where we've run through 1, 2 loops. We run into the third loop, we're at a 0 now. So we've incremented the count 1 twice. Right, count 1 is now 2. What we're going to do is we're going to end up hitting this else if right here. So SI is 0, right here. What we're going to do is we're going to go count 0 plus 1. Then what we need to do is we need to check the max length of the 1 right here, because we're in the other section of the else if and we have now run out of ones. So what we want to do is we want to check the max length of the 1, of the count of the ones. We can use math.max for that. And we'll see, is the count of the ones bigger than the current max length of the ones? And we'll just assign whatever that is to max length 1. Then what we need to do after we've reassigned that, because we've run out of ones and we're now looking at a 0, we have to reset the count 1 to 0. So at this point, we've come through here, we said, okay, what's bigger? Max length 1, which is 0, or count 1, which is 2. And assign that to max length 1. So now that will become 2, and count 1 would become 0. And when we come back through this loop again, we're going to do the same logic right here, just checking max length 0 and count 0, and that's pretty much it. So let's grab these two here, and we're going to change this to 0, this to 0, that to 0, and that to 0. And then the other thing to note that's kind of tricky is that when we exit this loop, one of these two will not have completely run. So when we hit this 1 right now, SI equals 1, we'll do all this logic, we'll never hit the else if, which means we never check the math.max that's down here for max length 1. So we need to check that after we've exited all this if-else logic here before we exit the loop. So what we just need to do here is we need to grab these, throw them in there, can move them over a little bit. So now we've set these max lengths correctly here, and all we need to do is return max length 1 is if it's greater or not of the versus the max length of 0, and we're supposed to return true if this one's bigger. We're basically seeing, are there more 1s than 0s, just to recap that. So let's run this. All right, we have successful test cases there. We submit it. Make sure I don't have any typos. Okay, and it's accepted. I usually don't worry about this stuff in my videos, and also we have a bunch of console logs. That's going to affect our speed. And I'll leave this on the screen so you can view it. And that's 1869, longer contiguous segments of 1s than 0s in JavaScript.